the next season will be something that I've never seen before. And there are some seasons in our life that we will struggle more than others, but it's because the harvest will be bigger on the next one. Amen. And we find Jonah kind of in a season that I think I could relate to, and I know that you will relate to as well. The first thing we find out about Jonah, Jonah chapter 1, and in the section of Jonah chapter 1 verses 1 through 9, we see Jonah getting a word from the Lord. And Jonah is told, go to Nineveh to preach. And in Nineveh lives the Syrians. And I don't know if you guys ever seen 300. But, you know, it's kind of like that. The Syrians are really bad people. They're evil in every sense of the word. They found, and in history shows us that they found like very unique ways of torturing people. They were like masters of torture. And they did some of the most horrible things, but I think the worst thing that they did was they obligated Jews to marry Syrians. And is where we get Samaritans. And we hear Jesus talk about Samaritans. It's like kind of like a mixed breed that neither either Syrians or Hebrews really liked. They were kind of isolated. They were pushed away, and that was a way of the Syrians destroying the Jewish race, which was just deceitful and very evil. And these are the people that Jonah is told, well, I want you to go over there and I want you to preach to them and tell them that they're going to be destroyed. And Jonah does not respond to God. He doesn't. All we really see him doing is getting on a boat in a whole different direction to a place called Tarshish. Now let me tell you a little bit about Tarshish. How many of you have ever been to Hawaii? I've never been to Hawaii. I've seen it on pictures and photographs, and they tell me that it doesn't even compare if you go there personally. But if you've ever been to one of our tropical beaches or somewhere really nice, how many of you, when you're in a location like that, cannot be reminded of the glory of God? If you're in paradise and the waterfalls are falling and the waves are coming in and the breeze is and you see the dolphins jumping, how many of you will say, yeah, this does not remind me of God? Not at all. So he was going to a place like that. That's what Tarshish was. It was like a paradise. So it's just mind-boggling that he's trying to get away from the glory of God, going to a place like, you know, Sandals Resort. You know, like that's where he's heading. And on the way over there, and this is what I love about God, that God would even use your mistakes. He will use your delays. He will use your mess-ups to bring glory to His name. It's not like you could catch God by surprise and say, no, I'm not going. I'm getting on a boat in a whole different direction. You know, it's not. God will use your mistakes. He will use your inconveniences. And He would do them to bring glory to His name, especially if you're called a child of God. And the reason why I get to this conclusion that He doesn't really care is because he falls asleep. And he's like abandoning himself, knowing. Now, how many of you know that when trouble comes, you're trying to pay attention on where you missed some instructions from the Lord? Anybody? How many of us know that when the storms comes, we know we didn't follow some instructions from the Lord? And for Jonah to just fall asleep and go, you know, whatever, is to show that Jonah was in a place where his heart was not in the right place. His heart was just too strong. It was too hard. And the reason why his heart was strong, and we realize this, is because the compassion of God was to send him to people in need. And he did not see that as a need. He saw his own selfish way and he went the other way. How many of us have ever been there? You know, and it could be in the most subtle way. You know, it could be like God saying, take some time for me. It could be something really simple like, I need to talk to you. Or will you go help this person? And maybe in that simpleness, we don't say, God, I'm not going, but we do something else instead. And in doing that something else, we realize that when storms come our way, they might just be God's way of getting us back on track to where we need it to be. think and I believe that the people that are in need when trouble comes and you're among them, they're calling out to their God. And in our society nowadays, they're counting on the government, they're counting on celebrities, on media, they're counting on everybody else. Those are their gods. We can't blame them for saying, man, I hope that they give us another bailout, or I hope they come up with some program to help people in need. While we're standing here with a valuable word, with a word of hope, and we don't give it. And sometimes we're not able to give it because our hearts have been hardened because of our disobedience. And Jonah has found himself there, and they wake him up and they say, why don't you cry out to your God? And Jonah was put in a spot where they ask him, what is it that we have to do to get rid? What have you done to bring this upon us? And what do we have to do to get this away from us? And I think that that's what society is asking of us believers. What is it that we need to do? What have we done? And what do we have to do to change this? How can we turn this around? And Jonah simply says, throw me overboard. And these people do everything possible not to throw him overboard. And that for me is just amazing, because the role is turned. It's like watching a movie and the good guys are really the bad guys, and the bad guys are really the good guys. Have you ever watched a movie like that? Like when the cops are bad? And this is kind of like the same scenario. The people that are not believers, that do not fear in God, are fearing God, the God of Jonah, because they realize, they have heard the stories. They know that Jonah is serving a God that doesn't really have boundaries when it comes to his people. He changes government. He turns over cities. I mean, this is the God of all gods. This is God. And they get scared and they go, Jonah, what have you done? And why you brought this upon us? And instead of throwing him overboard, they just take the boat and they try their best, and their heart is to get to shore, and they can't. They have no other choice but to throw Jonah overboard. And boy, have I ever found myself there. I found myself there when you're questioned about your faith, and you go, why are you doing here when you're supposed to be over there? And what have you done? And what can we do? And the lack of following instructions precisely, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get there. It means that God has different provisions to get you to where He promised you had to be. Now, I don't know if I'm ministering to anybody, but that ministers to me. Because there's been plenty of times when I know that the only choice is to throw me overboard. You know, there's people right now getting fired and getting laid off, or people almost losing their homes. And there's really hard times upon us, but there's believers out there that are going through that, and they're in peace. And they're in hope, because God has provided to them another way. God has provided to them a fish, something to keep them sane and take them to where they need to be. So my encouragement to you as we study the book of Jonah is to look at this man and look at him and put yourself in his shoes, and look at him as a man who got some weird instructions from God, just like we got. We give you thanks for your word and for the understanding of our seasons. And God, today as we study this book, and as we continue to study this book throughout this season, we ask you, Father, to dwell in our hearts the great necessity of finding out the instructions